When I was 21 years old, I and a couple of my college friends decided to do something fun and daring. If we had known that things would end up horribly like they did, we wouldn't have endangered our lives that way. Before I delve into the story, I'll share a little story about me. I was raised by very religious parents, and even though my parents were quite religious and believed in the supernatural, I didn't belong to their school of thought. I was that kid who never bothered to explore rumored haunted houses in my neighborhood because I believed they weren't real. I thought it was lame to go into an old house with a bunch of dumb kids and then start talking to ourselves in the name of speaking to a ghost. So I grew up thinking that all the supernatural stories and encounters people talked about were just their imaginations. It wasn't until I had a first-hand experience with an entity that I cannot describe that my perception of the supernatural and paranormal were changed. So precisely 4 years ago, one of my college buddies, Max, suggested to our friendship group that we do something fun and daring. And his idea of fun and daring was for us to travel to another town and explore an abandoned asylum that had been locked up by the government. At that time, our friendship group was made of 6 people, and out of the 6 of us, I was the only one who laughed at the idea. I told them it was lame for us to break into an abandoned asylum just because we wanted to do something fun. And that's when Max and the others said that there were rumors that the asylum was haunted by the ghosts of crazy patients who never made it out of there. So they wanted to see if it was actually true. At the end of the conversation, we voted for those in favor of the short trip. I ended up being outnumbered. When that happened, I wanted to just back out of the trip because, as I mentioned earlier, right from my childhood days, I never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. But because I didn't want to be teased or seen as a coward, I agreed to follow Max and the others to the abandoned asylum. Since the town we were traveling to was roughly 2 hours away from where we schooled, we decided to travel to the place on a Friday after we attended our last lectures. On that Friday, our last lecture ended at 4 p.m., and by 5 p.m., we were all set and left in 2 cars. After roughly 2 hours on the road, we arrived at that town by 7 p.m. It took us another hour to locate the abandoned asylum. The asylum was located in an abandoned area of that town, and I'll be honest, driving through that area, where there was literally no one in sight, gave me a very bad feeling. While I was in the car feeling uncomfortable about the area we had just driven in, the others seemed excited to finally explore the legendary abandoned asylum they had heard about. Before we even left college, the plan was for us to go into the abandoned asylum and spend the night there. We had packed enough supplies for 6 people, and some alcohol too, just in case we wanted to spice things up a bit. On getting to the asylum, we realized we didn't need to cut through the wire fence and the main door because the lock had already been broken. When we saw that the wire fence and the lock had been broken, we weren't surprised at all. We just assumed that some other explorers must have broken the lock and didn't bother to put it back. Without wasting time, we turned on our lamps and flashlights and walked into the abandoned asylum. At first, walking into that asylum didn't give me an eerie feeling, but after we picked a spot and settled there, I began to feel very restless. Deep down, I had an uncomfortable feeling that we shouldn't have been there, but I couldn't bring myself to voice it out because the others were having so much fun. 5 minutes after we settled down, Elena, one of the girls with us, said she had a surprise for us. The next thing I knew, she pulled a Ouija board out of her backpack. Even without being told, I knew what the board was for. I just didn't expect them to believe that the spirit board actually worked and could be used to communicate with the dead. While I sat there drinking a can of beer, I watched as Elena, Max, and others tried to communicate with the dead using the Ouija board. For the first 10 to 15 minutes, they tried to communicate with the ghosts of the asylum, but they didn't respond. When they didn't get any response, Max and I decided to leave them and check out the rooms in the asylum. We were barely away for 5 minutes when we heard Elena and the others screaming excitedly. They even called Max and me and told us to come and see that the Ouija board was working. I thought they were bluffing until Max and I returned to see the planchette moving on its own after Elena and the others asked a question. Honestly, I could not believe it, and I wish words could explain how I felt when I saw the planchette moving independently. Excited that the Ouija board worked, Elena and the others continued to ask questions and get responses. It was almost like something we watched in the movies. In the process of asking the ghost questions upon questions, the spirit told them that there was something in room 309 that we needed to see. By that time, I had seen enough for one night, and I was so freaked out. Curious to find out what was in room 309, Elena, Max, and the rest of us all began to search for it. Since it was a very big asylum, Elena suggested that if we split and took different wings of the asylum, we would find the room faster, and we all agreed. Precisely 10 minutes after we separated, Elena and her team found the room, and they yelled for us to come and see it. My God, even as I tell this story, I still have the same feeling I had that night as we walked into the room. It turned out that room 309 was more like a torture room for the patients. We saw things we should not have seen, and by merely entering that room, I could feel a sudden sense of anger, pain, and hate overwhelm me. Also, there were scratches on the wall with dry bloodstains, which wasn't a beautiful sight. After staying in that room for minutes, we decided that we could not look at those horrible machines and torture equipment anymore. In fact, because of how that room made us feel, we were ready to call it a night. But little did we know that the spirit that tricked us into going into the room also had his plans for us. Just as we were about to turn around and leave, the door shut on its own. Then, out of nowhere, the temperature in the room suddenly dropped, and we could literally see our own breath as we talked and exhaled. At that point, no one was curious or excited anymore, so we began to freak out and struggled to open the door. In the process of struggling to open the door, we heard Elena scream from behind us. And when we turned to see what had startled her, I literally watched as a force pulled her up and threw her at the wall. Unfortunately, that hard throw caused Elena to crack her head, and she died on the spot. Terrified at what just happened, we began to scream in fear. One after the other, Elena and everyone else who touched that Ouija spirit board and the planchette got attacked by an unseen entity, or whatever it was. Knowing that I would be the last to die, I did something I never expected I would do. "Please, don't kill me!" I yelled at the top of my voice. I said that when I saw that I was the last one remaining out of all my friends. I was so terrified, I didn't even know when I began to sob. The next thing I heard, the door unlocked and opened behind me, and I ran out of that room without looking back. Even when I got to the spot where we had kept our supplies, I couldn't grab anything except one of the car keys. As soon as I got into Max's car, I drove off at a fast pace until I got to the part of town where I could find the police. I tried to explain everything to the police, but the police never believed that an entity in the abandoned asylum killed my 5 friends. Till today, everyone thinks I had something to do with the 5 dead bodies they found in an old dusty room, which had no number.